The biggest mistake I see every summer is not planting the wrong vegetables or forgetting to water. It is building a beautiful raised bed and then slowly cooking the roots without even realizing it. Most people think their tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and beans are simply tired because the weather is hot. They keep adding fertilizer. They water more often. Some even blame bad seeds. But the real problem is sitting right under the surface where nobody looks. Every hot afternoon, that raised bed becomes warmer than the plants can handle, and every single day you lose a little more of the harvest you were expecting. I made this same mistake years ago, and I paid for it with baskets of vegetables that never grew as large as they should have. That was frustrating because I thought I was doing everything right. If someone had shown me one simple habit earlier, I would have saved a lot of money and a lot of disappointment. Today, I want to show you exactly what changed everything for me, because this is not about buying another expensive product. It is about understanding what your plants are quietly asking for during the hottest weeks of summer. Once I understood this old method, my raised beds stayed healthier even during long stretches of heat, and my harvest became much more reliable. The leaves stayed greener. The soil stayed alive longer. The vegetables kept growing while many gardens around me seemed to slow down. Most people never notice the warning signs because the plants still look healthy in the morning. Then the afternoon sun comes and the roots begin to struggle. A few days later, flowers start dropping. Small fruits stop growing. Leaves curl just a little. Nothing looks serious until weeks have passed, and by then the damage has already stolen part of the season. That is why I always tell people not to wait until they see sick plants. The secret is preventing the problem before it starts. An old gardener showed me this many years ago, and he smiled when he said that vegetables do not care how expensive your raised bed is. They only care how comfortable their roots feel every single day. At first, I thought he was exaggerating, but after trying his method myself, I realized he was absolutely right. The interesting part is that almost nobody talks about the first simple step because they are busy looking for complicated solutions, and that first step is where everything begins. I used to believe that if a raised bed dried out during the afternoon, all I had to do was give it more water. That sounds reasonable, and it is exactly what most people do. They walk outside with a hose every evening and soak everything again. The soil gets wet for a little while, and everyone feels like the problem is solved. Then the next afternoon, the same thing happens all over again. The plants droop. The leaves lose their strength. The soil feels hot when you touch it with your hand. Week after week, the vegetables spend more energy trying to survive than trying to grow. That is when people start buying bottles of fertilizer or special plant food because they think the plants are hungry. In reality, the roots are stressed. A stressed root system cannot use nutrients the way a healthy one can. You can feed the bed as much as you want, but if the roots are struggling, the results will never match your effort. I remember standing beside one of my own raised beds years ago, wondering why the tomatoes looked smaller than the ones growing directly in the ground. They received the same compost. They received the same care. The only difference was that the wooden sides of the raised bed were heating the soil much faster than I expected. I had built something that looked beautiful, but every sunny afternoon it acted almost like an oven around the roots. That was a hard lesson because I had spent good money building those beds. An older gardener looked at my garden for only a few minutes before he smiled and asked me one simple question. He asked if I had ever checked the temperature of the soil a few inches below the surface in the middle of the afternoon, instead of early in the morning. I had never even thought about doing that. When I pushed my hand into the soil, I understood immediately what he meant. The soil was much warmer than it should have been. The plants were not asking for more fertilizer. They were asking for relief from the heat. That conversation completely changed how I looked at summer gardening. Most people spend all their attention looking at the leaves because that is what they can see. Very few people spend time thinking about what is happening below the surface where every harvest truly begins. Once I understood that simple truth, I stopped wasting money on products I did not need and started using an old method that costs almost nothing. The surprising part is how simple that method really is, and most gardeners walk right past it every single day without noticing. The old gardener who taught me this never talked about expensive garden products. He never carried a bag full of special fertilizers or complicated tools. Instead, he walked around his garden collecting things that most people would throw away without a second thought. Dry grass after mowing, shredded leaves from last autumn, straw left over from feeding animals, even small pieces of untreated cardboard with all the tape removed. At first, I honestly thought he was just cleaning up his yard. Then I watched him spread those simple materials across every raised bed until the soil was almost completely hidden. He looked at me and said that the sun cannot steal what it cannot reach. I never forgot those words because they sounded almost too simple to matter. A few weeks later, I understood exactly what he meant. The beds, covered with mulch, stayed cooler long after the uncovered beds had become hot. When I pushed my hand under the layer of dry grass, the soil felt slightly damp and cool, even after several hours of strong summer sunshine. Just a few feet away, another raised bed without protection was dry on top and much warmer underneath. That was the moment everything finally made sense. The goal was not to keep adding more water. The goal was to stop losing the water that was already there. Most people work very hard carrying watering cans or dragging long hoses around the garden every evening. They are replacing moisture that disappeared because the soil was left exposed all day. A simple layer of mulch slows that loss dramatically and gives the roots a much more comfortable place to grow. The beautiful part is that this method costs almost nothing if you use materials you already have around your home. I usually spread a layer about 2 or 3 inches thick and leave a little space around the main stem so air can still move freely. Many people make the mistake of pressing mulch tightly against the stem, and that can hold too much moisture where it is not needed. Leave a small gap and let the plant breathe naturally. Within days, you begin to notice small changes. The soil stays softer. Weeds appear less often. Watering becomes less frequent. The plants stop looking tired every afternoon. These changes seem small at first, but they build on each other through the entire summer. By the end of the season, those little improvements often become pounds of extra vegetables. But mulch alone is only part of the old method because there is another simple habit that makes an even bigger difference, and that is where most gardeners unknowingly make their next costly mistake. Most people think the best time to water a raised bed is whenever they notice the plants looking tired. That sounds logical because the leaves are telling you something is wrong. The problem is that by the time the leaves begin to droop in the middle of a hot afternoon, the plants are already protecting themselves from stress. Pouring cold water over hot soil at that moment often gives you temporary relief, but it does not create the steady growing conditions that vegetables really need. The old gardener taught me something that completely changed my routine. He said the best gardens are not watered when the gardener has time. They are watered before the plants ever feel thirsty. Since then, I have watered early in the morning whenever possible. The soil has time to absorb the moisture before the strongest heat arrives. The roots drink slowly and naturally instead of trying to recover from hours of stress. Another thing he showed me was to stop sprinkling the entire bed with a light shower every day. Many people do this because it feels like they are keeping everything fresh. In reality, most of that water never reaches the deeper roots where it matters most. It either evaporates quickly or encourages shallow roots to stay near the surface where the heat is strongest. Instead, I water slowly and deeply. I let the water soak into the soil instead of rushing across the surface. Sometimes I simply place the hose at the base of one section and allow the water to move down gradually before shifting it to the next area. It takes a little more patience, but much less water overall. Few people do this because they are in a hurry, yet this old habit creates stronger plants that can handle long, hot days with far less stress. One simple trick I still use is pushing my finger a couple of inches into the soil before deciding whether to water. The surface may look dry, but underneath there is often enough moisture for another day. Watering without checking can keep the soil too wet, and healthy roots need air as much as they need water. Overwatering is just as harmful as letting the soil become too dry. Once I combined deep morning watering with a good layer of mulch, my raised beds changed completely. I spent less time carrying hoses, my water bill became smaller, and the vegetables kept growing steadily through the hottest weeks of summer. But there is another mistake that quietly reduces harvests even when watering and mulching are done correctly, and most gardeners never realize they are making it until the season is almost over. One mistake I see almost every summer is people trying to grow as many plants as possible in a raised bed because they want a bigger harvest. I understand the thinking because I made the same decision myself. You look at all that rich soil and it feels wasteful to leave any empty space, so you squeeze in one more tomato, another pepper, a few extra cucumbers, and maybe some basil in every corner. At first, everything looks wonderful because the bed is full of healthy green leaves. It almost feels like success before the season has even started. Then, summer reaches its hottest weeks, and the problems slowly begin to appear. The leaves stay damp longer after watering. Air cannot move freely between the plants. Humidity builds around the stems. Some leaves begin turning yellow while others develop small spots. The vegetables become smaller even though you are watering regularly. Many gardeners think they need more fertilizer at this point, but the real problem is that the plants are competing with each other for sunlight, water, nutrients, and fresh air. An experienced gardener once told me something I still remember every season. He said, "You are not growing leaves. You are growing vegetables." That simple sentence changed the way I planted every raised bed after that. I stopped trying to fill every empty inch and started giving each plant enough room to become its best. It felt strange the first year because the beds looked almost too empty when I finished planting. I wondered if I had wasted valuable space. A month later, the plants had grown into those open areas, the leaves stayed healthier, and harvesting became much easier because I could actually reach every fruit without breaking branches. Very few people talk about this because empty soil looks unproductive in spring, but crowded plants often become unproductive by late summer. Another old habit I still follow is removing a few of the lowest leaves that touch the mulch or the soil once the plants become well established. Those leaves receive very little sunlight and often stay damp after watering. Removing them improves airflow around the base of the plant and helps keep diseases from spreading upward. I never remove too many leaves at once because the plant still needs them to produce energy. A few careful cuts are enough. It is one of those quiet jobs that takes only a few minutes but pays you back for the rest of the season. When you combine proper spacing, good airflow, deep watering, and cool protected soil, your raised bed begins working with nature instead of against it. But there is one final habit that brings all these simple methods together, and it is the reason some gardeners are still harvesting heavy baskets when everyone else believes the season is already slowing down. There comes a point every summer when I stop worrying about whether my raised beds are producing enough and simply enjoy walking through the garden each morning. That never happened when I was chasing quick fixes or buying one product after another. It only happened after I started following these simple habits every single season without trying to outsmart nature. Healthy soil stayed cooler. Water remained where the roots could use it. Plants had enough space to breathe and enough strength to keep producing even during long periods of heat. I began noticing something else that surprised me. The vegetables did not all ripen at once anymore. Instead, they arrived steadily, week after week. That meant fewer oversized zucchini hiding under leaves, fewer tomatoes splitting from sudden stress, and more fresh vegetables ready whenever I wanted them. For someone who enjoys sharing food with family and neighbors, that steady harvest is worth far more than one big rush followed by weeks of disappointment. Many people ask me what fertilizer I use to keep my raised beds producing for so long. They are often surprised when I tell them that the biggest improvements came before I ever opened a fertilizer bag. Healthy roots make better use of every nutrient already present in the soil. That is something many experienced gardeners understood years ago. They focused first on protecting the soil because they knew the roots were doing the real work below the surface. One habit I still keep every week is taking a slow walk through the garden without carrying any tools. I simply look. I touch the mulch to check if it is still covering the soil well. I push my finger into the ground to feel the moisture. I notice whether leaves look relaxed or slightly stressed. I look for small weeds before they become large ones. Those quiet observations usually tell me everything I need to know. Small problems are easy to fix when you catch them early. Waiting until the plants are struggling almost always creates more work later. Very few gardeners do this because they think they need to be constantly working. But some of the best decisions I make happen during those slow morning walks. The garden teaches you if you are willing to pay attention. Every season becomes a little easier because you begin recognizing small changes before they become big problems. That confidence grows year after year, and before long you realize you are spending less money, using less water, and harvesting more food than you ever expected. There is one final lesson that ties all of these simple ideas together, and it may be the most valuable one of all because it changes the way you look at every growing season from this day forward. The biggest lesson I have learned after all these years is that a raised bed is not successful because it looks perfect in spring. It is successful because it is still producing healthy vegetables when summer is at its hottest and many other gardens are already slowing down. That change did not happen because I found some miracle product or expensive system. It happened because I stopped fighting nature and started paying attention to the small things that really matter. A layer of mulch instead of bare soil. Deep watering instead of quick daily sprays. Enough space for every plant to breathe. A few quiet minutes each morning to notice small changes before they became big problems. None of those habits cost much money, and some of them cost nothing at all. That is probably why they have been passed from one gardener to another for generations. The simple methods usually survive because they work year after year. I still smile when someone visits my garden during the middle of summer and asks how I manage to keep everything looking so fresh. They often expect a complicated answer or a special product they have never heard about. Instead, I show them the mulch under the plants. I let them feel the cool soil beneath it. I explain why I water before the heat arrives instead of after the plants begin suffering. Most of the time, they look surprised because they realize the solution has been simple all along. Gardening has taught me that small decisions repeated consistently are far more powerful than one big effort made too late. Every season gives you another chance to improve a little. You do not need to rebuild your raised beds or spend a fortune on new equipment. Start with one simple change. Cover the soil. Water deeply. Give your plants room to grow. Watch them carefully and let them tell you what they need. Before long, you will notice stronger plants, healthier leaves, and heavier baskets at harvest time. That feeling is difficult to describe until you experience it yourself. You stop worrying whether your garden will produce enough because you know you have created the right conditions from the beginning. That confidence is one of the greatest rewards gardening can give. I hope the next time you walk out to your raised beds on a warm summer morning, you will remember that the biggest harvest often begins with the smallest habit. And once you see the difference for yourself, you may never look at your summer garden the same way again.